Just 20 years after the fall of the northern kingdom, Judah's king Hezekiah rebelled against Assyrian rule. Lachish, 30 miles southwest of Jerusalem, was the largest Judean fortress outside of the capital. It was here that King Sennacherib of Assyria decided to teach Hezekiah a lesson.
The outlook for the people of Lachish was very grim from the beginning. The whole might of the Assyrian Empire was concentrated on this city and its defenders.
David Ussishkin excavated Lachish for more than 20 years. One reason he was attracted here is because the Assyrian siege of Lachish offers one of the greatest convergences of the Bible, extra-biblical texts, archaeology, and iconography. Assyrian King Sennacherib was so proud of his campaign in Lachish that he commissioned an 80-foot relief for the throne room of his palace. Using a graphic representation of the relief, Ussishkin came to believe it is less the product of an artist's imagination and more like a snapshot based on an actual eyewitness account. First, he locates the siege ramp the Assyrians built to breach Lachish's fortified walls.
It is the only Assyrian siege ramp ever discovered and the only one from the biblical period.
There he finds evidence of the battle that took place.
First of all, there are the sling stones. They are carved balls of stone. They resemble tennis balls, but of course they are much heavier. And they were shot with slings, and we see slingers in the Assyrian army in the relief, and also the Judean defenders are using slings.
He also finds more than 1,000 arrowheads, clear evidence of how concentrated the Assyrian attack was. Then he climbs to the top of the city wall, just above the siege ramp, to search for Assyrian King Sennacherib.
In the relief, we see that Sennacherib sat on his throne, directing the attack, and I believe that it must be this big farmhouse of the Moshav, which we see from here. This place is just in front of the Assyrian camp, just opposite is the siege ramp, and this must be the optimal point where he could set and directed the attack.
From this vantage point, Sennacherib witnessed his soldiers storming the city, slaughtering and heaving its defenders from the ramparts. Judean officials and leaders of the rebellion were impaled and displayed near the city gate. He ordered the people exiled and then burned Lachish to the ground. In addition to the extensive Assyrian account, there is also mention of the battle in the Bible, though in far less detail.
King Sennacherib of Assyria was at Lachish with all his forces. 2 Chronicles 32:9.
An interesting way to compare different ancient historiographies is to look at the way the siege of Lachish is treated in the Assyrian records and in the biblical account. Obviously, it was of great importance to the Assyrians, but the biblical writers dismiss it in one verse. All they say is that Sennacherib was at Lachish. Well, he certainly was. For them, it was of little interest. The fate of Lachish wasn't important. The fate of the temple was.
And it was the temple and the city that housed it, Jerusalem, that was the next stop on the Assyrian military campaign. Sometime prior, Hezekiah prepared the city for the anticipated siege. He fortified the city walls and stockpiled food and ammunition. But there was one major weakness. Jerusalem's only source of water lay outside the fortification walls.
Jerusalem has only one spring of water, and this is the spring Gihon. We hear its noise just behind me. Only it is emanating from the ground outside the city walls. So whoever wanted water during a possible siege had to make sure that they bring the water in some way into the city.
The solution was an ambitious engineering project to build an underground tunnel. Ronnie Reich, director of excavations of the Gihon Spring, still marvels at the accomplishment. The tunnel needed to be 1/3 of a mile long, cut through solid bedrock, and almost level over this entire distance, so the force of the spring ensured that the water flowed from the spring to the pool. And with an Assyrian siege inevitable, time was of the essence. To speed the construction, the digging began at both ends.
At each particular moment, only 2 workers were working, one cutting from one side, the other from the other side, because the space was very narrow, 2 feet wide. Oh, and we reached the place where the 2 groups of rock cutters have met. It's exactly where I'm standing. And we can see here the cuttings of the axes in the hard rock coming this way. And when I just go 1 cubit or so into the southern part, we can see over here the marks on the wall, rock wall, going like this.
A little further down the tunnel, Reich arrives at the spot where King Hezekiah commissioned a memorial.
Here we arrived at the place of the inscription, where it once was.
It is the oldest monumental inscription ever found in Jerusalem. Today it's in a museum in Istanbul.
And it shows a few lines in Paleo-Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, of the late 8th century BC. Veze haya devar hanekiva.
The excavators struck, each man to meet his co-worker, pickaxe against pickaxe.
I imagine that it was a day to celebrate because the water went from the spring, which is outside the city on the east, to the pool, which is inside the city on the west.